Next author is Charles, or Charlie, but don't call me Chuck, DiFerdinando, and fifth generation Durango native, descended from Italian and Scottish immigrants. Wow. that's an interesting. What, beg your pardon?
I'm supposed to use this mic?
I think so. Is that
Okay.
right, Alex? Yeah, you're
Okay.
supposed to use that mic. So Charles is the visitor services manager. I think if you go into the museum, your office is right there on the left, right? You're kind of the gatekeeper at the Animus Museum.
Yeah.
Of course, has produced some of the great webinars, as many of us know. So happy to have you here. So you wrote about, I guess maybe your immigrant background or your family, Southwest Colorado's immigrant legacy. So could you tell us a little bit about maybe why you chose to write about that and the impact of immigration?
Well, I didn't really choose it. I was asked to do that, but no, it was fine. I had done a talk for the Genealogical Society previous to that, and I think Ellen heard that and was intrigued by it, and so that's why she asked me to do the article that I did. So
you did a marvelous job.
Well,
you got a lot in 650 words.
I'm long-winded, and let me tell you, it was hard squeezing. I had lots of help with editing, but yeah. So, and again, I mean, I am from an immigrant family. I mean, everybody's an immigrant, but you know, when you said Scotch and Italian, people probably think, what the hell is that all about? Well, my mother's side of the family were immigrants before the Revolution to Virginia. That's the Scotch side. And the Italian side is more recent. That's my dad's side of the family. So anyway, that's what that's all about.
I assume that Charles was for the Scottish King Charles I and the Ferdinand. Oh, Charles lost his head.
You got to remember, my middle name is Anthony.
Oh, okay.
That's the Italian part.
Okay. Okay. So you
Carlo Antonio.
Could have been a Tony.
Yes. Yeah. So anyway, but what's interesting about immigration to this part of the country, well, all over the country, I found this recently, and it's an immigration report that was published in the Durango Record of February 1881, and this is a national article, and it says, immigration at the Port of New York during the year 1880 was the largest on record since the establishment of the Emigration Commission in 1847. It amounted to 320,808 persons. The next largest year was 1854, when landings were at 319,228. The total arrivals in 1879 were only 135,000, and so that's an increase during the past year of 185,738 people. Since the establishment of the Emigration Commission to date, the total number of arrivals of immigrants was 6,177,833 people. So, and the census of 1880 shows that huge increase of people to the United States.
Well, what kind of immigrants found their way to Southwest Colorado? And I guess a lot of it had to do with the railroad again, and that people were moving here to work on the railroad and or being brought here by the railroad to work in the mines and so forth.
Well, there was such a boom in the beginning in the 1880s that by 1880 there was a severe labor shortage all over the country. So big companies, especially here in the West, mining companies, railroad companies and so forth, smelting companies were going to Europe, sending recruiters to Europe to bring needed labor back to the West. And that's how my Italian side of the family got here. I had a great uncle who was recruited by the railroad to come out here, and so that's how the chain of immigration started on that side of the family. But all of the mining companies needed labor that knew what they were doing. The mines in the San Juans here had specific conditions. Water was a huge problem, so they brought over people from Great Britain, from the Cornish mines. They were very deep tin mines and had to deal with flooding and water problems. So those people had the experience. They didn't want unskilled labor. They were bringing over people that had a specific skill that they could put right to work. So you had Welsh coal miners came into this area, again, they brought Slovenian people and other Eastern Europeans to work in the smelters because those people had those skills, etc. So.
Okay, so a lot of people were recruited here.
Yes, they were
many
recruited.
different-
They
but-
paid for their passage. To get them here, you had to sign a contract that you'd work for a certain period of time to pay off your passage. And then you had the choice to either remain or you could go back. And some people, after they were here, decided the streets weren't paved with gold and decided to go back, or they got enough money to go back and live in a better style than they had when they came.
Well, some people were recruited here and stayed, and we wanted them here. Some people were not asked to stay.
Well, at one time or another, they were all asked to leave in one way or another. And, the Chinese were a good example of that, because in 1892, the federal government passed the Geary Exclusion Act, and they deported every person of Chinese descent from the United States. Sounds a little familiar, doesn't it? And again, some of those people end up coming back, but how would you like to be established in business and then told you have 30 days to liquidate your assets and we're shipping you off? And that's what happened here in
We're seeing some of that today too, I think.
Yep.
But yeah.
Yeah. And, every group, again, and Jeff brought this up, this area has always been prone to the boom and bust periods. The silver crash of 1893 threw the whole world into an economic panic. And that's when you get this backlash towards different immigrant groups. But it starts with the Chinese and then every other group. But, people seem to forget that we were all immigrants at one point, and every immigrant group in the United States has suffered backlash, at different times.
Well, even in your family, didn't
Yeah.
you have a uncle or great uncle that
had a great uncle that, it wasn't just him, but he was a coal miner at the time, and this is in the 1920s during the resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan. And the Klan locally here was trying to intimidate anybody of Italian descent, Irish Catholics, Mexican people, and so forth. They were trying to intimidate them to get them to leave. And my great uncle was coming home from the coal mine up behind Perrins Peak, and one evening, and out on Lightner Creek there, he was in his wagon, and he was confronted by Klansmen on horses with their robes, full regalia, and they pulled guns on him and said, "It's time for you to leave." And he always carried a 12-gauge double-barrel shotgun under his wagon seat, and he pulled it out and he said, "Well, if I'm going to leave, maybe I'll take a few of you with me." So things like that, and he wasn't the only one. The Bodino family, they ransacked their home to try to intimidate them. They burned crosses on Smelter Mountain on Christmas Eve when they knew the churches were having Christmas Eve services, specifically St. Columba and Sacred Heart at midnight. And when those people came out, what did they see? The cross burning up there, and that was a signal it's time to leave. But thank God they didn't, and they weren't intimidated. I think it's funny, people said they knew everybody that was in the Klan because on Monday morning, if you walked down the alleys in Durango, you'd see all the Klan robes hanging out on the clothesline, and you knew exactly who was in the Klan. So
it's funny, we think of today's, modern contemporary times as being sometimes being stressful, but I mean, my goodness, it's like super stressful to be, have crosses burning and threatened with shotguns, and so it was a rough time. I mean, sometimes our movies may romanticize the time, but it was tough.
Right. Well, and again, like I mentioned, the Chinese, many of them came back and established themselves again. And again, we don't have a large Chinese population now, but again, all of the whole immigrant story is these people saw opportunity to improve their lives. They tried to come to a place where they thought they could do better than from where they left. The European immigrants were facing war all the time, and especially if you were poor, you got conscripted into the military and you were just fodder for the war effort. So again, these people came here thinking we're going to have a better life, and many of them did make a better life for themselves. The Chinese people, of course, they made a big thing of educating their children so that they wouldn't have to go through the same thing, and their children have moved on and gone to other places, but some of the rest of us are still here, and we still make this our home.
It must have been quite a sight at the time to think, we think of cosmopolitan as being very sophisticated, worldly people, but we were very cosmopolitan, but just kind of at the worker level, the labor level. So it must have been interesting to be in this area to see all these different dresses and cuisines and languages, quite a sight.
Well, and again, the silver crash helped to galvanize the labor movement, and that's what helped to start uniting some of these diverse ethnic groups, because they were all threatened losing their jobs, and they had to work in horrible conditions. And so the labor movement starts, and that was one thing that helped all these diverse groups to sort of band together to work together for a better life. But again, all these different groups maintained their culture. Many of them had social organizations. The organizations were not only for social activities, but to provide help in case you got injured on the job or whatever. They had mutual benefit societies because there was no government support for you if you got hurt in the old days. You were just on your own.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. And a hand for Charles. Thank you.